explosion device, or IED. The Department of Defense says the explosion happened near the town of Ain Issa, Syria. It's about a 30-mile drive from the Turkish border. The Pentagon says it is withholding further information about the attack until officials determine releasing those details is appropriate. President Obama has authorized up to 300 U.S. Special Operations Forces to work with groups fighting the Islamic State in northern Syria. The U.S. military is assisting the Syria Democratic Forces. It's an alliance of Kurdish and Arab groups in trying to isolate and capture the ISIS capital of Raqqa. Of the killed service member, Defense Secretary Ash Carter says in a statement, quote, "It is a painful reminder of the dangers our men and women in uniform face around the world to keep us safe. Please keep this service member's family, friends, and teammates in your thoughts and prayers. And this Thanksgiving, I hope you will join me in expressing thanks to all of our dedicated troops who selflessly protect us every day." The Pentagon says 8 U.S. service members have been killed in action in the fight against ISIS since Operation Inherent Resolve began in 2014. This as U.S.-backed forces continue their offensive to capture Mosul, an ISIS-controlled city in northern Iraq. Doug?
Rich Edson, thank you. And now to presidential politics on this Thanksgiving evening. Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate is about as far culturally from the 17th century Plymouth Rock as you can get. But the Florida resort has become the site of a working holiday for the man who is set to move into an even more impressive digs in January. The president-elect is still busy trying to figure out who's coming with him to the White House and who he can convince to stay right where they are. Correspondent Peter Ducey is with the team in Palm Beach, Florida tonight. Good evening, Peter.
Good evening, Doug. Before most American families even turned on their ovens today, the president-elect turned up the heat on an American company, showing that his first post-election holiday would not be spent laying low. Before his Thanksgiving meal, the president-elect was trying to make a deal, tweeting this morning that, quote, "I am working hard, even on Thanksgiving, trying to get Carrier AC Company to stay in the U.S., Indiana. Making progress, will know soon." The air conditioning and refrigeration company that announced a plan to move 1,400 jobs to Mexico earlier this year didn't take long to respond, posting from its account, quote, "Carrier has had discussions with the incoming administration, and we look forward to working together. Nothing to announce at this time." As a candidate, Mr. Trump guessed Carrier would crumble beneath threats of hefty import taxes if they started producing products overseas.
Within 24 hours, they will call and say, "Sir, we've decided to stay in the United States. We'll stay in Indiana," or they'll go someplace else, but they're staying in the United States.
Also on the president-elect's plate today, trying to figure out who will fill critical cabinet posts, like Secretary of State. Top advisor Kellyanne Conway tweeted today that she's been getting a lot of correspondence from Trump loyalists worried about putting Mitt Romney in that job, and linked to a Politico article listing these backers' concerns about Romney's history of attacks on Trump. Then Conway tweeted, quote, "Kissinger and Schultz as secretaries of state flew around the world less, counseled POTUS close to home more, and were loyal. Good checklist." That intriguing tweet follows another confusing day of will he or won't he with Dr. Ben Carson, who says the president-elect wants him in the cabinet as Housing and Urban Development Secretary and is now going out of his way to make sure everyone knows he's not hesitating because he's worried about a lack of relevant experience on his resume.
In terms of complexity, I can guarantee you that very little of it comes close to neurosurgery, and particularly complex neurosurgery. And these things can easily be acquired.
More than 2 weeks after winning the election, Trump acknowledges that not everybody accepts the results, but he's asking for help from people who voted for him and people who didn't in uniting with this Thanksgiving address.
It's my prayer that on this Thanksgiving, we begin to heal our divisions and move forward as one country, strengthened by shared purpose and very, very common resolve. In declaring this national holiday, President Lincoln called upon Americans to speak with one voice and one heart. That's just what we have to do.
More than 40 years ago, Marjorie Merriweather Post, who built Mar-a-Lago behind us, tried to leave it in her will to the federal government to be used someday as a presidential retreat. But it never worked out until this Thanksgiving, where the man who eventually bought it is using it as a president-elect's retreat. Doug?
Thank you, Peter. Well, Trump continues to communicate with Americans on his own terms and in what could be considered a more moderate tone as well. Well, here to discuss that tonight is Chief National Correspondent Ed Henry. Good evening, Ed.
Good to see you, Doug.
So I want to know what the thinking is behind Kellyanne Conway's cryptic tweets and about the Secretary of State position, the potential nomination of Mitt Romney. And then we have Mike Huckabee saying that Romney should make a public repudiation or at least an apology of his attacks on Trump before being offered the job. Does that track with what you're hearing about the transition team's thinking?
It does. A new piece of information I'm hearing tonight from a Trump transition official is that there has been a conversation going on in private, very quiet, of course, about whether or not Mitt Romney should issue some sort of formal or informal apology to President-elect Donald Trump. Does he write a letter? Does he put out a statement of some kind? Because in the words of Mike Huckabee, as you said, he has pointed out on Fox that Mitt Romney didn't just go after Donald Trump's policies. He went after his character. These were direct attacks, calling him a fraud, for example, and a phony. And so if he were to be nominated as Secretary of State, it seems like that's business that needs to be cleaned up. And so from what I'm hearing from this official inside the transition about a possible, and I underline the word possible, apology from Romney, that tells us, it gives us a clue that Romney may be a much more serious contender for Secretary of State than a lot of people assumed at the beginning. Because, of course, if he was not a serious candidate, and there are other names out there, Rudy Giuliani, David Petraeus, Romney wouldn't even be considering an apology. It wouldn't even be broached by anybody unless maybe he really wants this job.
And I know that Eric Erickson of Red State just tweeted recently that he would be considered moderate on the international stage, a reassurance, a calming presence that perhaps Donald Trump might not be. And it's not just Romney who is the outsider in Trump's thinking right now. Nikki Haley, the governor of South Carolina, was a very sharp Trump critic. Does it seem that Trump wants a team of perhaps dissenters around him, or at least not a bunch of yes men?
Yeah, and that's what's getting very interesting about this. Nikki Haley was somebody who was very critical about the Muslim ban, for example, and you would think she would have no place in a Trump administration, and neither would Romney. The fact that in the case of Haley, she's actually been nominated as the U.S. ambassador to the UN, that suggests a change here. But I think it may be an even bigger one, is look what's going on with retired General James Mattis. When Donald Trump went to talk to the New York Times, he signaled real flexibility on a big issue, which is waterboarding, which critics, of course, call torture. And during the campaign, Donald Trump said he wanted to bring back waterboarding to get tough on terrorists. But he then told the New York Times a couple of days ago, hold on a second, I talked to James Mattis about that, and he says it doesn't work. And so basically, I've changed my position. Now, critics are going to say, wait a second, he's a flip-flopper, he's backpedaling, he said one thing in the campaign, now he might govern a different way. But there's another way to look at that, of course, Doug, and it's that the critics of Donald Trump, including the New York Times, said this is somebody who was unstable. You can't trust him, his temperament, to be commander-in-chief. If he's someone willing to go behind closed doors with a retired general, with the respect of James Mattis, and say, you know what, you make a good point, I'm going to rethink this, it shows more flexibility and maybe a better temperament than his critics thought, Doug.
Yeah, I often look at Trump as a pure negotiator in every relationship he has. He starts out with the hard line and is subject to give and take, depending on how the negotiation goes. You know, it's been a transition that is keeping with Donald Trump's style. And one case in point there is Dr. Ben Carson's saga.
Yeah, and some of it gets herky-jerky, and you're right, and I think there may be conservatives, and you hear them, particularly in the case of Romney, saying, what's going on here? Where is the core for Donald Trump? Because, of course, another way to look at some of the machinations is that, you know, is he really a conservative, or is he going to, you know, move to the middle on a lot of these big issues like a waterboarding? In the case of Ben Carson, it's interesting because he has a specialty in healthcare, but now being talked about as housing secretary, that might seem herky-jerky, but you know what? The campaign was accused of being herky-jerky. There were staff shakeups, and it worked. And so Donald Trump is not going to change. If it ain't broke, don't try to fix it, though.
At the very least, it's going to be a very interesting 4 years. Ed, I always appreciate your opinion. Thanks very much.
Good to see you, and happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah, same to you, Ed. Thank you. Let's talk about how the president's national security team and strategy are shaping up. Joining me now is New York Republican Congressman Pete King, a member of the House Homeland Security Committee. Happy Thanksgiving to you, Mr. King. Good to see you.
To Doug. Thank you.
Just your observations, generally speaking, about the national security picks we've seen thus far.
I think they're exceptional, particularly General Flynn. If General Mattis ends up being Secretary of Defense, that would be outstanding. Mike Pompeo, as head of the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, is a terrific pick. I served with Mike on the Intelligence Committee. Here's a guy who was #1 in his class in West Point, graduate of Harvard Law School, and he's been a soldier on the ground. So he is uniquely qualified. And I'll tell you, being with him on the committee, he's one of the hardest workers, takes it very seriously, especially in issues like Benghazi. He was in the forefront. As far as the Iran deal, the nuclear agreement, it was Mike that found certain parts of the deal that the rest of us didn't know about, that hadn't been disclosed. So, no, he's an excellent choice. And so I just think the president-elect is doing an excellent job. He really is. And for so much criticism he got the first few days, it shows that he does certainly know what he's doing. And once again, he's at least one step ahead of the media.
You talked about Pompeo at CIA. One of the key chief components of that job is being a good manager, because the CIA, like so much else in Washington, is a vast bureaucracy that requires a special kind of navigation. Does he have those skills?
I believe he does. As an Army officer, as a law school graduate, and I've seen the work he's done on the committee, and also as far as handling special assignments on the committee, where it was his job to obtain evidence, coordinate it, put it in a combined package. Yes, I think he is. Now, again, the CIA is a vast enterprise, and until someone does it, you don't know if they can do it. But I am confident that if anyone can, it'll be Mike Pompeo. I think he has he's the knowledge of someone who knows how it works on the inside, from being on the Intelligence Committee and the depth of his effort, but also he's a person who has been thinking about these issues for many years, and so no, I think he's exceptionally qualified.
I'm sure you remember many years ago, Senator John McCain called the CIA a rogue agency that needed reining in. Do you subscribe to that theory? Does Pompeo subscribe to that theory? And what needs to be done if indeed that is the case?
Well, again, Mike Pompeo will have to speak for himself. But no, I think that there are elements of the CIA who basically should be more coordinated. I think in the past you have had instances where some elements of the CIA were going off on their own. And I'm not saying as far as any violations of human rights or anything like that. I'm just saying even like during the Iraq War, I think there were elements of the CIA that were undermining President Bush. They had a different view, or they weren't pleased with President Bush, and they were selectively leaking and working against him. So I think it's important that this be looked upon as a team. And I think, again, being a captain in the military and #1 in his class at West Point, Mike Pompeo will be able to impose that team concept. Hopefully everyone will go along the way they should, and if not, I think Mike will be able to take the appropriate action.
And have you been approached by that Trump transition team for any position within the administration?
No, I haven't. I mean, I've spoken with some people in the transition team, but I've not been offered any position. I've not asked for any position. And quite frankly, being in the Congress, I'm really excited about Donald Trump's anti-terror and counterterrorism agenda. And I believe that being on the Intelligence Committee and the Homeland Security Committee, and as a past chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, I'll be in an ideal position to be able to really help Donald Trump, President Trump. I saw the president-elect on election night. I was at his headquarters, and I've had some conversations with people since then, but nothing involving me, and I'm not looking for anything, and I'm right now the happiest guy in the world, just looking forward to be able to move his agenda on Capitol Hill.
Representative Peter King, thanks so much for your time. Again, happy Thanksgiving to you.
You too, Doug. Thank you.
Donald Trump is already causing waves with members of the media. He has scolded several journalists just in the past week. So is the Washington press corps ready for President Trump? Let's get some thoughts now from Fox News media analyst and host of Fox Media Buzz, Howard Kurtz. Good evening, Howard. Good to see you.
Same here, Doug.
We've seen some evidence that Trump is making a course correction. But then again, we saw this meeting with media executives, television news executives, and highly paid anchors in which he apparently excoriated them. We also saw this meeting with the New York Times staffers and the editorial board. What do you make of them and the contrast between the two?
Well, it's a dysfunctional relationship, but it's the only relationship both sides have. Now, Trump may not have excoriated the television executives and anchors to the degree it's been reported, but at the same time, he is savvy enough to know that on some level he needs the mainstream press that he loves to attack. And, going to the New York Times for that meeting rather than receiving a delegation in Trump Tower was, I am told by somebody close to the president, a sign of respect, trying to mend fences with the paper.
It's been 2 weeks, over 2 weeks since his election. Why hasn't he had a press conference yet?
We're seeing a very different Donald Trump during the campaign when he was constantly doing interviews and on TV. Now, this may be because he is circumventing the press by putting out his own video on his policy priorities, using Twitter as a weapon. He's very good at that. But at the same time, he is pretty engrossed in assembling a government, which is much more challenging for an outsider who doesn't have long, deep political relationships. And so I don't think he feels the need to be on television quite as much. The downside for him is that the news agenda right now being shaped by leaks and speculation.
And how will his appointments affect his relationship with the press?
Well, for example, if President-elect Trump names our colleague Laura Ingraham as press secretary or some communications job, she is an aggressive and strong-willed conservative who will push his agenda, but at the same time understands the needs of TV, radio, and the web. If he names a more mild-mannered personality, it could be a bit of a more peaceful relationship. But really, the tone is set at the top, Doug, and President-elect Trump will set that tone if he continues to attack what he likes to call the corrupt and dishonest media. Then there will be a much more contentious relationship. If he seeks to smooth things over, look, he knows how to do this, and the press needs to cover him aggressively but fairly, which hasn't always been the case.
Well, this is interesting because I saw what I detected to be a bit of a tone shift last week, and I was up in Bedminster, his golf club up there, among the media pool waiting outside. And on Saturday afternoon, as it started getting colder and colder as the sun was going down, and people were freezing up there, he would open the door to the clubhouse there as he was greeting prospective appointments and ask, with cupped lips, how you guys doing out there? Need anything? And some of the local New York press said, yeah, how about some coffee? How about some hot chocolate thing? And he said, I'm not supposed to do that, but I will. And then out would come the spread of, hot dogs and coffee and hot chocolate. That was it. He was making an overture of goodwill, apparently.
Yeah, Donald Trump can be very charming when he wants to be. And he can even do it toward both conservative and liberal pundits who've been very, very critical of him. At the same time, we've all seen him do that for a day, or two, or a week, and then a story ticks him off and he goes on the attack. So we're still not quite sure which Donald Trump will be getting in the White House.
It could be carrot and stick both at the same time, depending on the need, I suspect.
Indeed.
All right, Howard Kurtz, good to see you. Always appreciate your perspective. Thank you.
Thanks, Doug.
The Navy is trying to determine the extent of a data breach that has exposed the personal information of more than 100,000 current and former sailors. It says the Social Security numbers and other sensitive details were on a contractor's laptop. The Navy is notifying those affected, and officials says there is no evidence the information has been misused. A bomb south of Baghdad killed at least 56 people today. ISIS is claiming responsibility. Authorities say the target of the car bomb attack appears to have been a bus carrying Iranian pilgrims returning home after a religious observation. Firefighters are working around the clock in Israel right now. They are battling a wildfire that is roaring through parts of the country's third largest city, Haifa. Tens of thousands of people have been forced to evacuate their homes. Authorities believe the blaze may have been set by politically motivated arsonists. And coming up next, how will history remember the Obama presidency in its fight against terrorism? First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 17 in Nashville as a sixth child dies from Monday's school bus crash in Chattanooga. Officials are also saying that the bus was on a road that was not part of the approved route. The 24-year-old bus driver is charged with vehicular homicide. Fox 2 in San Francisco with the hunt for two men who escaped from a Santa Clara jail last night. Lannon Campbell and Rogelio Chavez cut through the bars of a second-floor window. The two other men were apparently immediately captured. And this is a live look at Milwaukee from Fox 6. One of the big stories there tonight, Wisconsin election officials say they expect Green Party presidential nominee Jill Stein to ask for a recount tomorrow. Friday is the deadline for such a request. This comes after a group of election lawyers and data experts raised the possibility of security breaches in voting results in a handful of states. And that's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back. This is, of course, the final Thanksgiving for Barack Obama as president. Tonight, we'll look back at his performance in the area of national security. We have Fox team coverage. Catherine Herridge examines why the president has not been able to keep one of his first promises to close down the terrorist prison at Guantanamo Bay. But first up, Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen at the White House tonight with a look at how history may judge the commander-in-chief on his efforts to counter the terrorist threat. Good evening, James.
Doug, good evening. On most issues, most modern presidents compile a record that is, at best, mixed. And so it is for Barack Obama and his prosecution of a war on terror that he inherited from his predecessor. After 3 teams of ISIS terrorists killed 130 people in and around Paris 1 year ago, President Obama underscored the constraints on him and other Western leaders.
When you're talking about the ability of a handful of people with not wildly sophisticated military equipment, weapons, who are willing to die, they can kill a lot of people.
3 weeks later, ISIS-inspired terrorists shot and killed 14 people in Southern California. The rise of ISIS in Syria and Iraq, the group's unprecedented seizure of territory and cash, and its ability to recruit killers online, including on U.S. soil, all after Mr. Obama dismissed ISIS as the junior varsity of terrorist groups, left Americans uncertain whether their commander-in-chief had a firm handle on the problem.
I don't want to put the cart before the horse. We don't have a strategy yet.
I don't think history will judge the administration to have been very effective. We've seen the unraveling of the region, whether it's Libya or Yemen or Syria and Iraq. And we've also seen an increase of terrorism in international sort of theaters, Western Europe, airports, and now in America.
As a candidate, then Senator Obama vowed to shift the war on terror from Iraq to Afghanistan.
If another attack on our homeland comes, it will likely come from the same region where 9/11 was planned.
And as president, Mr. Obama authorized a troop surge in Afghanistan and brought Osama bin Laden to justice.
A small team of Americans carried out the operation with extraordinary courage and capability.
But the Arab Spring and the Syrian civil war gave rise, according to the Rand Corporation, to a 58% increase in the formation of Islamist terror groups, a term the president refused even to use, even as he touted his success in rolling back ISIS.
And in both Iraq and Syria, ISIL has not been able to reclaim any significant territory that they have lost.
The White House says that President Obama treated the global war on terror much like other global issues, in that it was always his aim to enlist regional allies and to help train them so that they could carry the fight to the terrorists largely on their own. Doug?
James Rosen on the North Lawn tonight. Thank you, James. Right after this November's election, President Obama all but conceded that he would not be able to close Guantanamo Bay. That would represent a major defeat for his administration. Tonight, Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge on what happened and what could still happen.
Guantanamo will be closed no later than 1 year from now.
On January 22, 2009, President Obama signed an executive order, one of his first acts as commander-in-chief, to shutter the Guantanamo detention camps. But at the close of his second term, the promise is unfulfilled, and Mr. Obama blames a bipartisan coalition of lawmakers.
With respect to Guantanamo, it is true that I have not been able to close the darn thing because of the congressional restrictions that have been placed on us. What is also true is we have greatly reduced the population.
When he took office, there were 242 detainees. Nearly 7 years later, through a series of controversial deals, the Obama administration has transferred 182 men to other nations, dramatically reducing the current population to 60. In the final Final days of his second term, the president's team is now negotiating the transfer of so-called high-value detainees, including Hambali, who terror experts say is on par striking soft targets, including this 2002 nightclub attack in Bali that killed more than 200.
Hambali was kept in an enhanced interrogation program at CIA black sites and transferred in 2006 by President Bush with the other super high-value detainees to Guantanamo Bay. So letting this guy out would be really bad news.
There are 15 high-value detainees left, including the 5 men charged in the military system with plotting 9/11. Both the Bush and Obama administrations confronted this hardcore group, who are too dangerous to transfer out of U.S. custody, but their CIA detention and interrogation have made it virtually impossible to prosecute them.
We're talking about Gitmo.
On the campaign trail, candidate Trump promised to expand operations and reinstitute controversial interrogation programs, including waterboarding.
By the way, we are keeping open, which we are keeping open. And we're going to load it up with some bad dudes.
But after meeting with retired General James Mattis, a candidate for defense secretary, Mr. Trump softened his tone, stating Mattis believes there is more to be gained by building trust and rewarding cooperation with terror suspects.
And the Trump administration has signaled strongly that it is getting back into the detention and interrogation business. With a Republican-controlled House and Senate, there may be fewer blocks and new concerns for civil liberties and human rights advocates, Doug.
Thank you, Catherine.
You're welcome.
Now to a different kind of war. It takes place on America's streets, and the targets are police officers. A Detroit area cop became the latest to die in the line of duty. Caroline Shively looks at this open season this holiday season.
Wednesday night, 40 emergency vehicles accompanied the body of Officer Colin Rose from a Detroit hospital to the medical examiner's office after he became the 59th officer to die from a gunshot wound in the U.S. this year. Rose was shot in the head while working his job with the Wayne State University police force, trying to handcuff a suspect just off campus.
He just shot him. You know, we heard one shot and then we looked and the officer went down and he shot him twice.
Those 59 deaths mark a staggering 74% increase in gunfire deaths of police officers over last year, according to the Officer Down Memorial page. A total of 131 officers have died in the line of duty this year, up 13% compared to 2015. President-elect Trump campaigned as a Get Tough on Crime candidate.
A Trump administration will protect those who protect us, and we will stop this tremendous surge in crime.
Now the International Association of Chiefs of Police is looking to the incoming Trump administration to take action.
We're hoping that a real good look by the president-elect and his team by putting together a National Criminal Justice Commission might be one of the answers we need to look at a holistic approach for once.
The IACP also reports there have been 20 ambush killings of police officers so far this year, the most since 1995. San Antonio detective Benjamin Marconi was one of those 20, killed while sitting in his patrol car. A suspect arrested in that case said he didn't know the officer.
I've been through several custody battles, and I was upset at the situation I was in. I lashed out at somebody that didn't deserve it.
You ever think he said to his family?
I'm sorry.
It's been 50 years since a National Criminal Justice Commission like the IACP is requesting was established. That commission made over 200 recommendations to Congress, resulting in more funding and the creation of the nation's 911 system. Doug?
Thank you, Caroline. All the news involving police is not bad tonight. Correspondent Will Carr reports from Los Angeles on how officers are going way beyond the call of duty to connect with people in one of Southern California's most dangerous neighborhoods. The means of communication may surprise you.
Go! Pump your arms, get low.
In the middle of Watts, a Los Angeles neighborhood still emotionally scarred from brutal anti-police riots in the 60s,
Set, go!
a group of kids and coaches have come together for football practice on the only grass field seen for miles.
How you feel? Are you ready? Okay. Are you ready? Okay.
But the Watts Bears aren't just preparing for their next opponent. Every run, pass, and touchdown is tackling the trust gap between the community and law enforcement.
To try to change the community, you have to get your hands dirty. You got to start working with the kids that are 9, 12, so that then when they're 15, 16, 17, 18, that relationship that they have with law enforcement is completely different.
The goal? Keep the kids on the field and off the streets. So these 4 coaches, all Los Angeles police officers who patrol Watts during the day, have traded one uniform for another. mentoring the players a game at a time.
Rather than just arresting and moving on to the next problem, we're preventing a problem before it even starts.
For many, the police officers have become family.
They're like another dad. They're like more parents for us. They give us good advice. All cops are not bad, and you should just respect the police, and then they give you respect back.
And it's working. The 3 housing developments involved in the program have seen a 50% reduction in homicides since the Bears hit the field in 2011. This year, violent crime is up across Los Angeles, but has dropped in Watts. The program's so successful, it's branched out. Officers filling in at father-daughter dances, tutoring, and even going to parent-teacher conferences.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7!
Football is the carrot, but we're really using that as a way just to mentor and really just be a focal point in these kids' lives where we're helping them out to do better things in their lives.
Players' parents tell us that if a program like this can make teenagers respect law enforcement in South Los Angeles, then it can work anywhere. Doug.
That would be so good to see. Thank you, Will. A working holiday for the president-elect. We're going to talk to the panel about Donald Trump's progress in filling out his new administration. Up next.
Hi, I'm Sergeant Jeremy Brock from Albany, New York, through the 369th Sustainment Brigade here in Camp Arif John, Kuwait. Just want to say happy Thanksgiving, my friends and family back home. To Jenny and Connor, I love you, I miss you, and I'll see you soon.
As a country, we've just emerged from a noisy, passionate, and sometimes divisive campaign season.
It's my prayer that on this Thanksgiving, we begin to heal our divisions and move forward as one country.
Well, the president and the president-elect both speaking about Thanksgiving and their hopes for the future. Mr. Trump says it's a working holiday at his Mar-a-Lago estate in Palm Beach. He'll be residing there throughout the weekend. But he had some time for work today and some time for tweets. He said, I'm working hard, even on Thanksgiving, trying to get Carrier AC Company to stay with us in the U.S., Indiana. Making progress. We'll know soon. And that does indeed appear to be true. Carrier responding in a tweet, quote, Carrier has had discussions with the incoming administration, and we look forward to working together. Nothing to announce, though, at this time. Let's bring in the panel right now. Tom Rogan, columnist for National Review. Tim Farley, hosting and managing editor of Morning Briefing, POTUS on Sirius XM Radio, and Daniel Halper of the New York Post. So this suggests that Trump's plea to American industries to stay in the United States appears to be working, at least to some small extent. We also had that announcement by Ford. They're reconsidering their decision to manufacture Lincolns in Mexico, keeping them instead in Kentucky. What do you think of that, Tim?
Well, I think first in the Ford case, they had already said that they were not going to be moving out of the country anyway. And in the case of this Carrier incidents, I'm not sure exactly what Donald Trump can do to make them, although he had said during the campaign that he was going to put taxes and heavy taxes on them. That would require Congress. But at the very least, it indicates that he's pushing for what he was trying to do, and he's looking good. I mean, in this transition, I think this has all been about the optics. It's about looking presidential and trying to at least look like you're living up to the promises you were making. And so this is part of that, I think.
Daniel?
Yeah, look, we don't know exactly what the conversation took place and what they actually said, but that it took place, as Tim said, is a continuation of a Trump promise, and it's him trying to come through. But he will eventually have to come through. People will hold him to his word. People will wonder if countries are leaving, and you got to expect that there'll be some sort of made in the USA bill in Congress, and he has the legislative support on Capitol Hill to get something done to try to make these companies do it if he's not able to just negotiate without making some sort of legislation. So look, people will hold Donald Trump to his promises. The voters will. They will respond. And it will be very clear. Right now it's just talk and optics. It's nice. It looks good. But eventually he'll have to deliver.
Tom?
I take a slightly different approach. I think this is just pure PR. Look, the president-elect knows coming in that the only way functionally you are going to be able to persuade American companies to retain more jobs and production in the United States is to reform the corporate tax code. It's a simple fact, because the exodus of wealth, the Obama administration has repeatedly tried to prevent it through actions through the Department of the Treasury. It hasn't worked because there's too much financial incentive for companies to move to lower tax locales. if he does that, if he can get a corporate tax reform through, then functionally, I think he could actually accomplish some of this. But that will be the pivot, and I think he knows that. I think this is Thanksgiving. Everyone be happy and eat your turkey, and jobs are going to stay here. But the real turkey will be consumed or not consumed come next year.
Right. I want to shift gears a little bit now to another potential nominee for a cabinet position whose name has not been really discussed all that much. We're talking about Wilbur Ross for a Commerce Secretary, as the AP said in an article about Ross recently, quote, the billionaire investor considered the king of bankruptcy for buying beaten down companies with the potential to deliver profits. What do you know about Wilbur Ross?
Not much, except what I've been reading in King of Bankruptcy is in every headline, and that he was a Democratic supporter. He worked had worked with Bill Clinton to work with Russia on some deals. So a big Democratic fundraiser as Secretary of Commerce, following in the tradition of Penny Pritzker, which is President Obama. It's not the top of the line position. I still think people are waiting to see what happens at State, at Defense, which, we've heard a couple of names floated, but Commerce Secretary is kind of one of those names that, all right, that sounds kind of cool, and they're going to have to do something with trade. He evidently is very much in simpatico with Donald Trump on trade, but other than that, I'm not sure what this signal sends to anybody other than the fact that he knows a guy who's in business, and that's what they're going to proceed with.
Any meaning in this to you, Daniel?
Look, Donald Trump has named there are about 10 people that we know of who are in the Donald Trump administration, including Trump himself, and this will be the third billionaire. So it sends a message, I think, to a lot of people that, wow, he's really rewarding a lot of people who are rich and a lot of people who are wealthy. Like our previous discussion, it will depend on whether he can deliver, right? And his resume as a turnaround artist might be perfect for this job. Donald Trump campaigned extensively, saying that we need basically a turnaround artist. We need somebody who can come in and revive this country, who can make America great again. And so Wilbur Ross could be the perfect person. And we shouldn't prejudge people by any means based on their wealth or lack thereof. And nor should we look at his cabinet appointments. Wilbur Ross, Betsy DeVos, she's also a billionaire, the education secretary, and of course Trump himself. So look, it remains to be seen whether or not what his plans actually are, as Tim says, and where the Trump administration will take this.
I was struck when I saw, I think it was on CNN, early in the campaign, they did a focus group, and one woman said, what is it you like about Donald Trump? And it was very pithy, but enlightening to me. She said, he's rich. I want to be rich. Yeah. This guy's rich. It's a measure of success, Tom.
It is a measure of success, and I think what actually this says to me, this prospective appointment, is that Trump is really going to push hard on something that unifies, I think, the wide diversity of the Republican Party, which still the disunity is bubbling below the surface, although it's been papered over a little bit with some of these appointments. But because of Mr. Trump's stated desire to get rid of a lot of regulations, you bring in someone like this who has that reputation in the private sector of restructuring companies. It does suggest that will be an early priority for the administration if he does pick him. And I think a lot of Republicans would welcome that.
There's said to be a lot of internal dissension about the potential pick of Mitt Romney as Secretary of State between the Romney camps and the Giuliani camps and perhaps the Petraeus camps, whose name is now also entered the fray. But we're trying to read into the tea leaves a little bit over this. Here's a tweet from Kellyanne Conway, quote, receiving deluge of social media and private communications re Romney. Some Trump loyalists warned against Romney as Secretary of State. And then this follow-up tweet from Conway. This from Eric Erickson shows how diverse our GOP party truly is. While Dems are in an identity crisis, struggling to connect with America, then she cites the previous Eric Erickson tweet, in which he says, yet as Secretary of State, Romney, he's referring to here, he'd provide some stability and a calming effect internationally. Trump would be smart to do that. Tom, you want to take that up?
It can't be David Petraeus for all his, frankly, heroism in terms of dedicating his life to service the country abroad, because of the CIA scandal and because of how much President-elect Trump hit Hillary Clinton on the email thing. I don't think it would be tenable. It would be hypocrisy. I do think, though, Mitt Romney, certainly around the world, he would be very much more popular. He's known by foreign leaders because of his business interests, but also because of running as the Republican nominee. They like him. They feel he's comfortable in terms of old school realist, traditionalist, conservative, in terms of that that outreach abroad. And I think he would be a very popular pick.
Give you about 15 seconds, Daniel.
Kellyanne's either on the reservation or off, right? There's a possibility that she is channeling Donald Trump. There's also the possibility that there's some dissension within the Trump transition team. We don't know what's going on within there, but if she is going off the reservation, this is the first time really Trump staffers, the most loyal, have really took swipes at Donald Trump himself in the midst of a very important decision.
Coming up next, how Democrats are still plotting to end the Donald Trump presidency even before it starts.
I don't believe anyone in this chamber wants to defend the hateful acts that are being committed in President-elect Trump's name. They lead to one unavoidable conclusion. Many of our fellow Americans believe that Trump's election validates the kind of bullying, aggressive behavior Trump modeled on a daily basis.
I think he's thinking of many different things as he prepares to become the President of the United States, and things that sound like the campaign aren't among them.
Well, we all know that Harry Reid will soon be long gone, but Democrats and Trump's opponents are taking up his torch now, launching a full-out assault and seeing whatever sticks against the wall when it comes to Donald Trump. We just saw this letter from Senator Elizabeth Warren and also Ranking Member Elijah Cummings of the House Oversight Committee, in which they wrote the comptroller of the GAO, saying this, quote, "We are writing today to request that the GAO conduct a review of President-elect Trump's taxpayer-funded transition. We are concerned about reports of disarray within a chaotic transition and ask that your review address several concerns, including conflicts of interest related to business holdings of Mr. Trump and his family, potential violations of protocol and security precautions related to Mr. Trump's communications with foreign leaders, and transparency related to the use of taxpayer funds in the transition. Because the transition will last only until January 20th, 2017, we ask that you begin this review as quickly as possible." Tim, we can see where this is headed.
Yeah, so far the Democrats have been using the approach, the personal attack. I mean, Reince Priebus keeps the trains running on time. Steve Bannon will keep the trains running to Auschwitz. I mean, that's basically the approach Democrats seem to be taking. I think that they're in better shape if they are trying to make an argument against Donald Trump about conflicts of interest because, number one, he campaigned on draining the swamp, and although in the New York Times he said there is no conflict of interest, he may be on good legal ground, but I think from a political standpoint he's going to have a little bit more of a tough time. The Democrats also are getting ready for these confirmations. Just remember, when we get into the situation where we have people actually in front of these committees, how many people remember Tom Daschle when he was going to be the Secretary of Health and Human Services? He was a shoo-in, and all of a sudden he wound up having problems with the auto service that he had and his taxes, and so he wound up not getting the job. There are going to be Democrats laying in wait, and subtly to do so. The Harry Reid approach is probably not going to work, but I think you'll see a lot more of this approach to whether or not Donald Trump has conflicts of interest, because that may play even among some people who are supporters of Donald Trump.
But Dana, we've talked about this before. I think last night we spoke about it, but Republicans, especially in the Senate, have this cudgel hanging over the heads of Democrats. If they go too far, if they cross the line, if they push this too far, you've got the limited nuclear option, which is in place, and perhaps McConnell could, as much as he respects the dignity and the traditions of the Senate, might expand that nuclear option.
That's true. But Harry Reid expanded it itself, and they're, I guess, going to take advantage of it. The only thing really holding him back is the Supreme Court, and I think that is where the Democrats will really fight it out. And I think, depending on who, of course, Donald Trump picks, but assuming it's some sort of mainstream conservative, I think the Democrats will use Donald Trump's Supreme Court pick to really lay the groundwork for how they'll try to win in the primaries in 2018 and later the presidency in 2020. And frankly, I'm not sure they know exactly how that's going to be. I'm not sure they know what their strategy is going to be. We're going to see a lot of identity politics, where there's going to be a lot of threats that, well, another conservative on the Supreme Court will roll back Roe versus Wade, voting rights, and various liberal policies that have been in place for many years. At least that's how it's going to be presented. That, I think, is where the Democrats will have the most success if they do it, if Donald Trump picks, again, a mainstream conservative, and if they pick their fight the right way.
Ed Rogers, Tom, writing in the Washington Post, said if the Democrats carry this process on too far, it could really be damaging to them, not because of the nuclear option, but he writes, quote, "On the outreach front, I would encourage the Democrats to maintain their obsessive focus on identity politics and assorted grievances and continue highlighting the flawed Black Lives Matter movement or their inane protests to nowhere as a featured cause of the Democratic Party. They should double down on political correctness, from insulting more safe spaces to stifling free speech on college campuses to drilling down on bathroom rules for public schools and keeping up the war on pronouns. And while they're at it, it wouldn't hurt for the Democrats to exaggerate the rise in the number of hate crimes during a Donald Trump presidency while ignoring the increase in the murder rate as a result of the Democrats' anti-police crusades and shielding local Democrat-led governments from any accountability.
Yeah, it's a long quote, but it's a quote that's apt because Democrats have suffered this oblivion, frankly, in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. The functional element here is all these Democrats changing tune to join Trump's camp. If Democrats seem to be obstinate and playing to the far left, as you see with the evolving, the role of Elizabeth Warren, Sanders now taking on this frontal lead. Prospectively, we'll see who's going to be the next head of the DNC. Those are issues that really put the Democrats in a difficult position. I think functionally what Schumer will try and do in the Senate is to try and take a medium tack in which they have a big battle over the Supreme Court. Frankly, I don't think Trump picks someone who makes a big push for Roe v. Wade. I don't think he cares about that too much, as he pretends he does. But I do think Democrats are going to have to find a way on some things to work with him. And that's why we see with Schumer the idea that prospectively on infrastructure spending, they will use that as their sort of pivot.
All right, Tom. Coming up next, the panel on Thanksgiving.
My Thanksgiving traditions are new because I grew up in the UK, but I spend it normally with my grandfather, who's 91, former Pacific Marine. Doesn't like my facial hair, but it's good fun. That's us on the photo. So we had a nice little Thanksgiving dinner, quite basic but enjoyable. And I think that's probably in the finest American tradition.
Fantastic. Dana?
Well, I have a couple kids at home, and we just try to invite as much family who will come. And we had, I think, 11 or 12 of us, and it was wonderful. A lot of my turkeys at home, and it was great. And look, we have a lot to be thankful for. It's great to be an American. It's great to we're thankful, of course, for the military service, and saddened to hear about the loss of one in Syria today. And of course, I have a great family that I'm very thankful for as well.
Tim?
My wife Diane makes the most amazing New England clam chowder, and that is one of the traditions that we use every year. And you just look at it. I mean, there you go. Wouldn't you want to have that right now? That's one of the great traditions. I mean,
those aren't potatoes either.
They are. There are potatoes and clams, and there are secret ingredients, which I can't tell you.
Oh, okay.
But
I was
anyway,
going to say they were very large clams.
I am very thankful. There is some left over, and I will be having some this evening when I arrive home.
Well, fantastic. And tell you what, I'm very thankful. I'm headed to the family gathering. My sister, among my 4 siblings, has taken on the role for many, many years now of cooking the Thanksgiving dinner, and she has never once, not once, asked me to do the dishes. So I'm thankful for that. And thanks for watching Special Report tonight. I'm Doug McKelway. Happy Thanksgiving to you and yours. Good night from Washington. A special edition of Tucker Carlson Tonight coming up next.